Welcome to the Big Interview from the Wall Street Journal. I'm Simon Constable. I'm joined today by Tea Party favorite and a man whose name keeps coming up when it comes to a potential presidential run. I talk, of course, of Dr. Ron Paul. Dr. Paul, thanks for joining us.
Thank you.
Will you be running for president?
I have no idea. I'm still very undecided, honestly. Okay. So I think about it and I consider it. And I was in Iowa recently, and I'll go to New Hampshire trying to feel my way. But it's a major decision for me. I did it once before, and it was a difficult task. So it'll take a month or two before I finally make up my mind.
Are there any key elements in deciding that?
You know, it's interesting. A couple of years ago, I was talking about what might really motivate me to do it. In the last campaign, I talked a lot about the financial bubble, the housing bubble, and I was concerned about that. And I said, if the next concern I have comes into fruition, that is my concern about the dollar, I'd have a hard time resisting wanting to talk about it. And I think the dollar's in trouble, and I think there's some signs that people are getting concerned about the dollar, and there's people talking about monetary reform, you know, internationally and domestically. If that event is very much on the minds of the American people, I'd probably want to participate in the discussion.
Now what is on the minds of a lot of American people right now is the deficit, and this does relate to the dollar. Sure. There's another deadline at the end of next week for the U.S. Government budget. What do you think is going to take to get an agreement before then?
I don't think we'll get a real agreement. I think we're just going to limp along, and I think eventually after the next CR, then they have to deal with the, raising the debt limit, and then they have to deal with this year's budget isn't even finished. They have to deal with next year's budget, and there's no sign that they're very serious. If the Republicans, who are more serious than they used to be, but not nearly as serious as they should be or should have been. If they mention that we want to cut $6 billion on one of these CRs, I mean, the Democrats are nearly hysterical about it. And $6 billion is nothing. I mean, we're talking about national debt going up this year, $2 trillion, and they're tinkering around with a couple billion here and a couple billion there. A couple billion here, a couple billion there doesn't add up to a couple trillion.
So do you think that putting a cap and not raising the debt ceiling would help everyone sort of get religion on this issue?
Yeah, it would, and I won't vote. I've never voted for spending, so I'll never vote to raise the debt limit. But it would be chaotic. I think it would be disruptive, and if people could be held rigid to this, they would finally have to quit. But just think of what happened in the last crisis. The Congress came to the rescue, and they had TARP, spent hundreds of billions of dollars. But the Fed spent what they wanted on their own, so it doesn't matter. So if Congress is limited and the Fed is still allowed there, they can bail out anybody they want, any corporation, any bank, any foreign bank, or whatever. So government's totally out of control. It's a much bigger problem than I think anybody around here understands. And the people who are getting annoyed, I don't think they quite understand it either, because sometimes the people who want to straighten this out, they might say, yeah, do this, but don't touch Medicare, and don't touch Social Security, and don't touch the military. It just goes on and on. I don't believe they're sincere about cutting back.
So what would you cut if you did decide to run for president and you had to make decisions? What are the tough decisions you would make?
Well, my rule when I have the opportunity to vote on the House floor, I vote for all cuts. And I never vote to increase anything, and I don't vote for any budgets, and I've been doing that since I first ran for Congress in the 70s, because I believe that because of the monetary system, it would breed the type of phenomenon that we're experiencing now. There with this endless spending, the ability of the Fed to monetize debt just encourages Congress to spend. I would, if they were serious and figured, boy, the breakdown of the monetary system is so bad, we have to get our house in order, why don't cut everything equally?
Just scale everything down, including the military, including Social Security.
Sure. Go through all the appropriations and don't have discretionary, non-discretionary, and just say, well, we're 10% over, cut every 10%. Even if you're 30% over, maybe 10% a year for 3 years, but the intense, the idea that they're going to do it, and if they're serious about it, you could do it over a 3-year period, but the odds of that happening, even though I think it's logical, the odds are about 0% or 0.1%. It's not going to happen. The momentum is too great to finance big government.
Do you think that this is in any way caused by divisions within the Republican Party? Do you think if the House Republicans were more together, then there will be less of a problem getting something through?
Oh, it would help. They're more together than they used to be. They are doing better now, but they're doing better now because they don't have a Republican president telling them to spend money. At least now they can be seen as standing up to Obama. But there is some division. Some want to cut more than others. But even if the Republican Party under these circumstances did a much better job, you still have to deal with the Senate, you still have to deal with the conferences, you still have to deal with the president, you still have to deal with off-budget items, and then you always have to deal with emergencies. Nobody votes against emergency spending, and war is always an emergency, and there's always a flood and a hurricane and everything else, always an emergency, and if somebody gets hungry, that'll be an emergency too.
So is everything an emergency now? Is everything categorized as the act of spending categorized as an emergency, or would you say that some people are actually saying, yes, let's cut
Well,
some stuff?
subjectively, everything's an emergency. I mean, it's sort of, we're working in the atmosphere of the breakdown of the financial system 2 years ago, the TARP fund attitude. And that sort of carries over because if you want to cut medical spending, they say, oh, you'll cut jobs and you cut medical spending. And somebody else will say, well, if you have medical spending, you're going to increase spending too. No, everything is urgent enough where you can't cut. Somebody has an interest in the spending, and that's why we flounder here. We just don't get anything done.
Now, a lot of the American public are really focused on jobs, and they think jobs are very important. There's a lack of creation of jobs. We've seen some encouraging signs, but they're only signs that we're going to have sustainable jobs creation in the private sector. Don't you think we should focus on that more than on cuts and leave the cuts till we've actually got more people working and back to work?
Well, that is, you would do that if you think spending money actually is beneficial, but it was the spending money and the deficits and the inflation by the Fed was the problem. So I think doing the same thing because you don't want the problems to get worse. If it caused the problems, if spending and deficits and borrowing and inflation and regulations caused it, that's what they're still doing. What you need is a correction. The market says correct it when it's out of kilter, when there's too much debt and too much spending and too much borrowing and too much taxes and too much regulation. You have to have a correction. And nobody accepts that economically speaking. They think that's economic anarchy and the government's supposed to spend more money and create jobs. Well, governments can't create jobs. All they can do is provide an environment where business people have an incentive or a confidence that they can make an investment and make some money. But they don't have that now. People, the Fed has done everything possible. I mean, the Fed is feeding as much money into the system, but people aren't confident. The banks were willing to take it and churn it and arbitrage it and make a lot of money, but no jobs came out of it. So doing the same thing over and over again will not create the jobs. Only the market can do that.
Now you're in a position to oversee what the Fed's doing now. What changes do you want to see happen to how the Fed operates?
Get rid of them.
Get rid of them completely.
Oh yeah, we don't need the Fed. But of course that's, at this moment, hypothetical.
Okay.
But if you have a dollar crisis where the world rejects the dollars worse than 1979, I mean, that was serious. We needed the IMF to bail us out.
Sure.
And the only reason that doesn't happen is the other world currencies aren't much better than ours. But the dollar and the world currencies will be rejected. Commodity prices will soar, interest rates will go up, and then the Fed will have to do something. No, I think oversight is the most important thing now. Under today's circumstances, we need to know what they're doing. Why do they get away with this? Congress doesn't even have the authority to know where they're spending the money and who they're bailing out. It makes no sense.
So you think what's been going on is the Fed's problem right now? Do you think that rising commodity prices have something to do with the Fed and the QE too?
Oh, absolutely. I mean, you wouldn't have this happening without all that money churning out there. It's just starting. I mean, they've been, think of the first easing, the $2 trillion, and now there's another $600 billion, and they'll do more. And if they need it, and that money is starting to circulate, and it's not creating jobs like they thought. it's creating prices to go up. If we get involved in education and say we're going to get more people educated, we don't get higher quality and more people educated, we get higher prices. In medicine, we spend twice as much as anybody else on medical care, and most of it comes from the government. We don't get better medical care. What we get are higher prices. And that's what we're seeing now. Right now, there's less in the stock market and less, there's still a lot in the bonds. The bonds are way overpriced and people still value the dollar. And they continue to do the same things. The bubbles are out there still, and we'll still have more problems.
You said that you thought that we couldn't get to abolishing the Fed, or we couldn't get to a position we needed to without a crisis. Do you think a dollar crisis will be good for America because it would result in the Fed being kicked out of the way?
Well, that's risky. You know, if people understood economics from a free market viewpoint, yes, they would. They say the Fed did it. It's all their fault. Let's get rid of them and let's have sound money. Let's look to the Constitution. But the many individuals that are more in charge than I am, the international people, the IMF and the World Bank, they know what's coming. And they're having discussions all the time about a worldwide fiat currency using the SDRs. And they want a total charge. So yes, the Fed might be undermined and the dollar may be undermined, but if we go that way, it'll be a lot worse. We lose our sovereignty, we lose political control, and it'll be a few people in the world that will be total control of the currency. And that would be very bad, instead of going in the direction of letting the market determine the currency, and that's what gold and silver is. That's determined by the market. It isn't determined.
So you would return to a gold standard?
I would certainly make, well, it's legal under the Constitution. We should legalize it and allow that to happen. But I'd like to see what the market would pick. I wouldn't mind. My argument for now is legalizing competition with the Fed. Instead of saying close down the Fed and let's have gold standard, I'm saying just legalize the Constitution, gold and silver is legal tender, change the legal tender laws, take taxes off gold and silver, and allow gold and silver to circulate in parallel to a dollar.
And I believe that the Utah government, one of the houses there, has passed something. You're in favor of that, but for the whole country. Is that what you're saying?
I'd like it to happen in the whole country. And although I love what the states are doing, you know, the Constitution says you can't issue currency. But they've also been instructed to use only gold and silver as legal tender. So just resolving that very technical point, they're absolutely right. Because if they took old silver dollars and old gold dollars and used them, they would be correct. And it would be constitutional.
Now what they're suggesting in Utah is I think, as well as old silver and gold coins that are U.S. coins, the current ones too, like the Eagles.
That's what they're going to use?
That's what it seems to. That's what.
Yeah, well, that's very good. I didn't look at the entire bill, but anytime there's various states now have had different proposals. That would be a good way of doing it and avoid the controversy.
Now the gold standard in the past has caused some problems. For instance, in the UK under Britain, when Britain was still, you know, the head of a very big empire, my home country, Winston Churchill tried to keep the pound on the gold standard too high. It ended up causing a lot of labor problems because things weren't flexible.
Now the key to what you said was he kept it too high. They went off gold for World War I.
Yeah.
And Churchill, I believe it was in 1923, everybody knew you go back to the gold standard. Sure. You robbed the people through printing money during war, and we did it too. Sure. We had our depression in 1921. The British had their same problem, and they knew they had to go back to gold. But I don't know the numbers in the pound, but in the dollar, you know, if today we went back to gold, would we go back to $35 an ounce? It would be crazy. You have to adjust, and since there were more pounds in circulation, and they went back to the original ratio of pounds to gold, it was unworkable, and it was a failure. So you have to allow the market to adjust it. See, the market is saying if you go back to a gold standard, it has to be at least $1,400 an ounce.
So it wasn't a failure of the gold standard, it was a failure of implementation.
Yeah. In all the problems of the 19th century, when they say gold failed, it was always the abuse of the gold standard for various reasons. Our Civil War period, they passed legal tender laws, greenbacks, and voided the gold standard for 20 years.
Okay, I want to switch now to Libya. The situation in Libya, Colonel Gaddafi still in power as we speak. My understanding, should we be intervening to help save the rebels that are trying to oust Colonel Gaddafi, or should we stand by?
Stand by, stay out of it. It's their fight, and I don't think it would be good for the people. If you're sympathetic, like I am, to those people who would like to get rid of him, if we show that we're part of them and they identify with us, that could backfire on them. I don't think we have the authority to do it. That's getting involved in a civil war, and we don't have the money to do it. We'd have to go out and borrow the money to do it. So no, I would stay out of it.
The money aside, though, don't you think that other dictators in the region might see it as like open season on any dissenting groups within their countries if we don't get involved?
But what's neat right now, it's open season on those dictators that we supported.
So you like that?
Oh yeah, I mean, look at Mubarak. We've gave him $70 billion, and the people rose up, and so far that looks better than Libya, but we don't even know how that's going to come out. But I think the worst thing for us to do is get involved now and picking and choosing who's to take over. But the very worst thing was getting involved and propping up a dictator. And we've done that on the various countries. The British used to do it. Now we took over, and since World War II, we do it. We have a different type of colonialism, but eventually colonialism fell apart. This is the end of American-type colonialism, is what I see.
This is the end of American-type colonialism. That's what you're saying? Okay.
Because Libya less so, but others were always receiving money from us. It was a token support for Gaddafi because 5 years ago we started doing business with him, sure. And that meant we would buy his oil and we propped him up. But that's not as bad as sending them billions of dollars in foreign aid. But in a way, we're in charge over there, and even the dissent, of course, in Libya had to be suppressed. Nobody wants to read or talk about that. But here's a country we just took over and rebuilt and sacrificed thousands of lives, both ours and theirs, and they wanted to participate in saying, we don't think we're getting a fair shake with our new government. They were arrested for this. So we talk out of both sides of our mouth when we encourage these uprising, and we have to go support somebody else. We've been trying to do that in Iraq and Afghanistan. It's a total failure from my viewpoint.
Total failure. I want to switch gears again to your son, Ron Paul, who's a senator now and also author of the book, The Tea Party Goes to Washington. You must be a very proud father with him in the Senate.
Oh, sure. I mean, it's still pretty amazing to me, and you mentioned that you had been up in the New Hampshire region a couple years ago, and he came to a rally there and introduced me, and all the family came. And I keep thinking back to that event. Who in that audience would have thought, within 2 years he'd be a senator? So I think it was pretty amazing.
So what would you say the best quality that you've given him? I mean, you brought him up. He's done very well. What's the best quality he got from you?
To be inquisitive and read and study and try to understand how the market works. A lot of people ask me, what kind of books did I shove in and get him to read? And really didn't. I mean, he knew I read books, and he would grab them off the shelf and he'd read them. But he probably has actually bought more books and given them to me because he found them fascinating over the last decade or so. So he became inquisitive and tried to figure out what makes the world work. And he, of course, I guess logically came to many of the same conclusions, that the market works better and freedom is better and totalitarianism isn't good. So all those things I'm very pleased with.
And what would you say was the worst quality that you've given him? Because we always pick up things from our parents. I know I do from my family.
The worst
thing that he's picked up from you?
From me?
Yeah.
Boy, I don't know, because I think he does so many things better than I do. He does real well in public speaking, and he's a little less rambunctious, and so I don't know. Maybe just giving up a medical practice and going into politics. I advised him. I said, "You know what you're doing." I said, this is, not a logical thing to do.
So being a doctor is better than being a senator in terms of worthiness, is what you're saying.
But he said I had no right to say anything. So yes, he made a choice and it was similar to mine, but there's a price to pay for that.
A price to pay, you mean for coming into
Oh
Congress?
Yeah, I mean he's already has seen the price to pay. Sometimes you get abused by people who want to quiz you for various reasons, and of course there's sacrifice. I know his will be the same as mine. When you leave your medical practice, you're away from your family more, and you don't have a medical practice. And I always was sorry that I couldn't practice medicine. That's why I was here for 4 terms. I went back for 12 years because I didn't want to give it up. So after,
do you think he'll find that hard? Do you think he'll after a couple of years he'll find that?
I think he would, and I think he should, because he's been trained and he can give people's sight back again by removing cataracts. I would think that would be tremendous satisfaction.
Now you mentioned earlier you wanted to see precious metals coins circulate. I have a couple here of interesting ones. These you may recognize the chap on them. It's Ron Paul. Do you recognize these? Have you seen this before? This one, Liberty dollar.
I sure have, and I've always been uneasy with having my picture on a coin.
But I mean, this would be the sort of thing, not with your face on it, is what you're saying, but that sort of thing, having coins to go and spend that were made of precious metals.
Yes, matter of fact, when somebody tried to circulate those, the government came down very hard on them because they called them a dollar and they wanted them to circulate. And
that was Liberty Dollar, yeah. Bernard von Nothaus, yes.
Yeah, it's too bad in a free country. You ought to be able to do that, but there's a monopoly and a cartel called the Federal Reserve in our banking system that makes that illegal to be used as money. So that's why earlier we were talking about using old silver dollars or current U.S. eagles, gold and silver eagles. That really puts them on the opposition, the Federal Reserve and Treasury on the defense, because they're U.S. Legal tender. You know, and here, governments have always, this is not now, but thousands of years, governments always viciously protect their power to mint the money, and they don't like competition.
They certainly didn't like it at that time. One last question, and got to ask you again, are you going to run for president? You can tell us, it's just us two.
Nobody would know.
No.
I tell you, one thing is that I can honestly say that I'm undecided. I'm 50-50. I might do it, but I might not, and time will tell. It'll probably take a couple more months.
Thank you very much for your time.
You're welcome.